how he's managing and handling this case and what might be happening with the FBI. Because right now, it should be a really good relationship. And, well, when you hear what I'm about to tell you, I don't think that's going to foster any good feelings. So let me start here. My colleague and dear friend Brian Enton has reported something new, and it's weird. Yet again, the FBI agents are in the back of Nancy Guthrie's house. They're behind her house. They've come back again 6 months into this investigation. They are back looking around. Why? Good question. But my guest today actually might have an answer, and it actually does make a bit of sense. So you'll hear that in a moment. And then also this news about the ransom note. Okay, so you probably saw my episode a week or two ago that Sheriff Nanos decided to publish.
She disappeared at 84 years old, and 6 months later, her own white Apple Watch, unplugged, was found on the floor by her bed. Maybe the most credible clue anyone has. Not because police found it, because the kidnapper described it. Welcome back to the Crime and Consequences. Today we're laying out, in full, exactly where the Nancy Guthrie investigation stands on the ransom notes.
Asked for all the money, give me $4 million by this date and $6 million by that date, or she gets it. And then the second one saying, oh dear, so sorry, didn't realize how sick she was, but she died shortly after we took her and we buried her with nature, and no more requests for money. So that's also probably a good key as to why it's probably real, because if it's a scammer wants money. They're not sending notes to say, I'm sorry she didn't survive. They're sending money requests, whether it's the first or the second or the third. And usually there's a lot of immediacy to it. But that second note didn't have any of that. So maybe that's why. Plus the details in the ransom note, Apple Watch, Nancy's Apple Watch, it's white, it's on the floor by her bed. Those are details that are very specific. And so those might be the reasons why they tend to believe those notes were real. So Sheriff Nanos decided to release both of those notes.
The Bitcoin wallet the FBI didn't want you to see. The man on the porch, the DNA that doesn't match anyone she knew. And the question a lot of people are now asking out loud. Is this case falling apart because of the people running it? Let's start at the beginning. January 31 into February 1st. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, vanishes from her own home in Pima County, Arizona, within about 36 hours. Investigators had blood on the front porch, and, according to reporting on the case, the crime scene was opened up enough that members of the press were photographed standing in it. One outlet caught it on camera first. Only after that made national news did the sheriff's department close the scene back down. And here's where the first real question mark appears. According to former Pima County Chief Deputy Rick Castagar, Sheriff Chris Nanos had opened the scene, stopped the search, and said there was nothing to be concerned about in the community. An 84-year-old woman, missing. And according to Castagar's account, the search stopped within 2 days.
And it was only after that, and that made national news, that the sheriff's department went back and said, clumsy us, we got to close this scene down. Which they did. And then
why on earth? With your background, I was absolutely flummoxed by this. On Monday, which effectively is just about 36 hours or so after Nancy vanished, Chris Nanos had opened the scene, stopped the search, and said there's nothing to be concerned about in the community. Why would anybody make those comments? And I don't want to I don't want this to be sort of a let's pile on him, but what would be the thinking behind somebody who would say, we closed the scene, there's nothing to be concerned about, and we've stopped the search?
I'm going to give you an opinion. And you asked me why. And it's very simple, because I know the personality. It's because I say so, I'm in charge, and you do what I tell you. That's why.
Had to have an underlying reason, though.
Well,
what do you think
there
the
is
underlying
no reason. They closed off that house multiple times and went back and searched the area multiple times and they found things after the fact.
If you're already asking why, hold that thought, because it comes up again. At the time, investigators knew Nancy had a camera on her front porch, but she didn't have a cloud subscription, so by initial accounts that avenue was set aside. Attention shifted toward the family. Her brother, In-law and his wife reportedly became a focus early on. Their car was seized and held for close to 2 months, and their home was searched at night.
You know, on that day too, I had a very high-level sheriff's source tell me that they had zeroed in on the brother-in-law and they were considering him as a prime suspect. And then we learned later on that they had seized the brother-in-law and his wife's car. They kept it for, better part of 2 months. They searched their home in the dark of night. Do you have any information from your former colleagues that was the focus of the sheriff's department early on, and that perhaps that was sort of a tunnel vision that stopped him from finding Porch Guy and everything else that we don't know today?
I'm going to address the issue of Porch Guy with you first, and then kind of come back to the idea of investigating the family members.
Meanwhile, the porch camera, the one that had been dismissed, turned out to be a Google Nest camera. Although the camera did not have a paid subscription, the FBI and Google were able to recover residual footage from back-end systems. It wasn't until the FBI stepped in and went directly to Google that the footage was recovered. What it showed: a man in full dark clothing, double gloves, and a mask walking up to that porch like he already knew exactly where the camera was. To former Chief Deputy Rick Castagar, the footage suggested a planned and sophisticated abduction.
So they dismissed any opportunity to find any video on that camera and went about the next thing. Then the next thing became, we got to look at the family. Now, cops out there who might be listening to me will understand completely. You don't rule out any potential here. And we don't know who's committed this crime. I have some theories. We can talk about that in a little bit. But it wasn't until the FBI got on board, with Chris's permission, of course, that they're the ones who went to Google and said, hey, have you deleted this stuff yet? Could we check and see? And they did. And lo and behold, here we got a bad guy, all gooned up in his attire, wearing double gloves and a mask, and walking into that porch knowing where the camera was. And I say that with emphasis because that tells me this was a sophisticated abduction.
So now you have two timelines running side by side, one where investigators are focused on the family, and one where, sitting untouched, is footage of a masked man who studied that porch before he ever stepped onto it. And according to Castagar's account, only one of those timelines was being actively pursued for a stretch of this case. Keep that in mind, because it's going to come up again when we get to the DNA. Now the ransom notes. Two of them, believed by investigators to be likely legitimate. The first demanded money $4 million by one date, $6 million by a later date, or in the notes' words, she gets it. The second arrived later, and its tone was completely different: an apology, saying she'd died shortly after being taken, that they hadn't realized how sick she was, that she'd been buried with nature, and no further demands. Investigators lean toward these being genuine, for a specific reason. Scammers ask for money, they don't apologize and walk away. And the second note contained no urgency, no repeated demand, the opposite of how a money-motivated hoax typically behaves. Then there's the detail that stopped a lot of people cold. The notes described Nancy's Apple Watch white on the floor by her bed. Not on the nightstand, on the floor. Ask yourself, how does a kidnapper know that? Unless they were standing in that room. But here's the part almost nobody was talking about until recently. When the sheriff's department released those two ransom notes to the public, they were briefly posted unredacted, including the Bitcoin wallet address the ransom demanded. That window was small, but it was enough. Online sleuths grabbed the address before it was pulled, redacted, and reissued. And what they found in that wallet was something that had not been intended to remain public. The FBI had sent a small amount of money into it. Approximately $300, enough to in effect test the line. And attached to that transaction was a public message, apparently from the FBI itself, reading, "We're ready to pay. Contact us," followed by a link to a private page. An active federal negotiation tactic, exposed to anyone who knew where to look.
Sheriff Nanos' department released the note unredacted with the wallet address, and the sleuths were able to go there. So the sleuthers were able to get in and take a look around that Bitcoin wallet address. And they were able to see not only the transaction, right? The FBI put a little bit of money in there to tickle the wire, but they were also, we knew that, but they were also able to see something else we didn't know. And the something else we didn't know is that the FBI sent a little message. At least it appears it's the FBI that sent the little message to the ransom seekers. And that message was posted as a public message at that wallet address, and it read, "We are ready to pay. Contact us," followed by a link to a private web page. Oh, man. I mean, that is stuff that just shouldn't be getting out in public, right? Now, to their credit, after they screwed up, they realized they screwed up, and the Sheriff's Department yanked that accidental public posting, unredacted ransom note with the Bitcoin address. They pulled it, and then they redacted it, and then they re-released it redacted. But the damage was done, and that shit was out there, right? And so now sleuthers were able to see the transaction that was actually done to try to, lure those ransom seekers out a little bit, pull them out a little bit, give them a little bit of money just to say, okay, we're here, and here's our message.
If you're the FBI, and a piece of your own operation gets leaked by the agency you're supposed to be partnering with, what does that do to the relationship going forward?
Well, I certainly see it as a significant mistake, and it continues to amaze me with the number of mistakes this case has generated coming from the Pima County Sheriff's Department. And I attribute this to the leadership of the organization. I've known and worked with Chris Nanos, the sheriff, for over 3 decades. I've seen him micromanage things to the point of creating problems on investigations. His history, interestingly enough, is really just focused on investigations. He's been there for nearly 40 years, and all he's done his entire career has been investigations, and he has a myopic scope of what a police department should run, how it should run, and what it's like. And he involves himself in minutia, and he's he's got people to the point where they're afraid to do what they know best to do.
That question brings us to the man at the center of a lot of this, Sheriff Chris Nanos. To be clear about what follows, this next section reflects the opinions of one specific source, Rick Castagar, the former Pima County Chief Deputy, who worked directly under and alongside Nanos for over 3 decades before Nanos became sheriff. These are his characterizations, not confirmed findings. According to Castagar, Nanos has a long history of tension with the FBI dating back roughly a decade to when he was appointed sheriff, and the FBI was separately investigating alleged corruption within his own department. Castagar says Nanos asked the FBI to keep him updated on that investigation. They didn't, and Nanos responded publicly, essentially telling the FBI that if they wanted to know how to run an investigation, they should come ask him. Castagar's assessment: that single moment set the tone for years.
Start to perspire, and it's just so visible, it's kind of troubling. And he became angry at the FBI. He got on the local news here and he said words to the effect, listen, if you guys, the FBI, want to know how to do a police investigation, come see me and I'll teach you how to do a police investigation. That's arrogant and it burns bridges. So Chris has had a long-standing disdain for the FBI. And certainly in this particular case, how many examples could I share with you?
And he says the pattern has repeated in this case. Blood evidence exposed to the press. DNA material sent to a private lab in Florida, a lab that, notably, still has to get its own certification through the FBI rather than to the FBI directly. And, in Castagar's view, an overall reluctance to hand real authority to the federal agency built specifically to handle abductions like this one. His opinion, stated plainly, if it had been his call, the case would have gone to the FBI by day 2.
The outcome of this. On day 2, when they really understood that Nancy was abducted, they, in my opinion, and if I were the sheriff, I would have done this, I would have turned the case entirely over to the FBI and subordinated the sheriff's department to them, let them handle this case, and we would provide boots on the ground and whatever else was necessary, our investigators, what have you. Chris has not done that to this day. He says they're involved, and yes, they are, but he stifles their ability and he stifles their autonomy in handling elements of this case that he shouldn't, but he does.
Now here's a detail that connects directly back to that early focus on the family we mentioned earlier. Weeks after the abduction, investigators found gloves scattered around the property. For a moment, that looked like a break. It wasn't. But there is one DNA sample that doesn't match anyone in Nancy's circle. A sample of male DNA, unidentified, not linked to family, friends, or anyone known to have been in her life. If you caught that detail earlier, that dismissed camera footage sitting untouched while attention went to the family, you were already ahead of where this investigation was for weeks. Investigators are reportedly now pursuing familial DNA genealogy on that sample, the same category of technique that identified the Golden State Killer. It works by comparing unknown DNA against genetic genealogy databases to trace a family line, even when the individual has never been arrested or tested themselves.
And I don't know what it is. Well, there is evidence that I'm not aware of, and that's okay. I don't need to be made aware of it. But there's evidence that they're pursuing. One of them is pretty clear, and it's been intimated by the sheriff department. It has to do with genealogy and familial DNA. You've heard that technology.
Oh, sure.
And it's a fairly recent technology where you have a bit of DNA that you can't identify in what we call the DNA bank. If a bad guy got arrested 10 years ago and his DNA was entered into this bank, it's comparative with what we have in our hands today to what it was then. And it will be very specific to a person. But that technology has grown and improved over the years to include a familial element to it. So people do 23andMe and other genealogy tests on themselves. Some of that data is in another data bank, DNA data, and there are ways to take this unknown source of DNA and attribute it to a family line that might produce
The person.
a bad guy at some point.
Yeah. A guy who may not be in the bad guy bank. I mean, that's how Brian Kohler was found. It's how we're finding Golden State Killer. However, I'm very, I don't feel as good about that. Granted, I don't know everything about that sample that they found. It's just a sample of male DNA that is not in her immediate family or friends or circle of people that she knows. That doesn't mean that it's not just DNA from a FedEx guy. We don't know that it's the bad guy. That's the problem. We don't know if that DNA they found belongs to the bad guy.
But, and this matters, Castagar is careful to note what that sample is not. It's one unidentified male profile. It could belong to the person responsible. It could just as easily belong to a delivery driver, a contractor, anyone who'd been near that porch for entirely unrelated reasons. As of now, there is no confirmation it belongs to whoever took Nancy. Which brings us to the FBI's most recent move, because 6 months in, agents were spotted back behind Nancy's house. Why, 6 months later, would federal agents return to a location they'd already processed? Castagar's explanation is straightforward volume. He says this case generated tens of thousands of tips, both national and international, and that agents are now working through them methodically, tip by tip, ranking each one by credibility.
They went back to the house and they discovered gloves all around, not all around, but in various places around the property or just off the property. That's interesting. It turns out the DNA testing on those particular gloves were from the investigators or the search and rescue folks or people known to the sheriff's department to be involved in the investigation. That's sad because it's careless of an investigator to do that. It contaminates a potential crime scene, and it's problematic. But I attribute the FBI going back there just recently, in the last couple of weeks, to following up on tip number 4,612, whatever it may be. They've got to pursue this. Somebody asked me recently, do I think that this is a cold case? And the answer is absolutely not. There's so many tips they got to follow through on, and it takes dogged police work. It takes effort. And you have to rank the tips by the extent to which they're credible.
In his words, this is not a cold case. It's a case buried in leads that still need to be run down, one at a time. There's one more piece of this worth sitting with. Recently, Sheriff Nanos was asked directly whether he believes Nancy is alive. His answer, paraphrased, why would he dash the family's hopes by giving his opinion?
Recording this on August 14th. He said, just because you're cleared, these are my words, but effectively his message was, just because you're cleared doesn't mean you didn't do it. And I don't understand what that means.
That's a way of just leaving the possible doors all open, and you don't exclude any potential. That's what that means. It's analogous to him saying that he was asked directly, do you think Nancy's alive or that she's passed? And his response was, why would I dash any hopes of the family? And why would I give that opinion if it's going to affect the family? That's actually a self-serving comment. And the family doesn't want to know what you think or what you think you should be saying to them.
Castagar's read on that answer is blunt. He calls it self-serving, and says the family isn't looking for a comforting non-answer. They're looking for what the people running this investigation actually believe, based on the evidence in front of them. Castagar's own belief, stated as his opinion, and nothing more, he thinks Nancy has passed, and that whoever took her no longer has a reason to keep her location a secret. So where does that leave things, 6 months in? A masked man who studied a camera before he ever stepped past it. A ransom note detailed enough to convince investigators it's real. A federal wire transfer exposed to the public by the very department meant to protect it. An unidentified DNA sample working its way through a genealogy process that, by nature, takes months. And a sheriff whose own former second in command is willing to put his name behind saying the leadership at the top may be the reason this case hasn't moved.
Yeah, yes, I am hearing that. They're stifled. They are not allowed to do certain things without his approval. Real quick side story. You can edit this out if you want. I approved a $250 training program for the Corrections Bureau. 300-400 people would benefit from this. And it was a Zoom type of a video where they could sit down for an hour and get some, in-service training. And he heard about it, and he dismissed it and disapproved. Now, I'm number 2 in the organization. He disapproved what I had already approved. And the reason is because the guy who was going to do the teaching did not support him during his election. This was a person who said derogatory things, I guess just like what I'm doing right now, but said derogatory things about him. So Chris disapproved a $250 training program out of a tens and tens of $1 million budget that the sheriff's department has. He found it, and his emotions involved themselves. He found it to be dismissed the training. What does that do? That hurts 300 or 400 people who could potentially gain from that training. It's ludicrous. And it's just one example I share with you that indicates just how micromanaging he is and how he gets in the way of allowing the resources he has, the talent they have, to do their job.
An 84-year-old woman is still missing. Somebody may have planned this, and somewhere, that Apple Watch detail, the one thing the public didn't know until it was written into a ransom note, may still be the detail that ends up proving who was really in that room.
Rick, what are your thoughts about the specificity in the ransom note about the Apple Watch charging on the floor at the foot of Nancy's bed? That to me just was alarm bells went off, because first of all, how would anybody know? And it must have actually been there for them to have taken that seriously. And what woman would have her Apple Watch on the floor of her bed? Normally you charge it on your nightstand, especially if you're 84. Like, that to me was a very unique detail.
I would agree with you. There's 2 sides to that. Well, first of all, if you're 84 years old and you have some physical limitations, putting it on the floor may not be the best idea. You got to bend over to deal with it. And as I get older, I realize that myself. Regardless, that specific information having been released in the demand is a little bit, it's kind of like a two-edged sword. I'll tell you why.
Whose account do you believe, the sheriff's or his former second in commands? Tell me in the comments and stay with this channel, because when the DNA genealogy results start to move, we'll be the first to break down what they actually mean.